Imagine a day that begins with the promise of family, laughter, and community, only to spiral into a heart-wrenching battle against injustice. Picture this, a bright, sunlit afternoon where neighbors gather for a barbecue, drawn together by the irresistible scent of grilled food and the warm embrace of friendship. But what if, in the midst of such unity, an act of discrimination shatters the joy, casting a dark shadow over everything you hold dear? What if the very place you call home suddenly becomes a battleground where the fight for dignity and respect is waged? Now, imagine that on this seemingly ordinary day, an unexpected visitor arrives. Not a friend, not a neighbor, but someone whose very presence sends a chill down your spine, a landlord whose prejudice is as clear as the glaring contempt in his eyes. He stands at the edge of the gathering, his demeanor cold and unyielding, a man who wields power not to protect, but to punish. His actions aren't driven by any concern for the community's peace, but by a deep-seated bias that targets a family simply for the color of their skin. How would you react if you were in their shoes? What would you do if someone you trusted, someone who should be safeguarding your home, turned against you with such venom? As you listen to this story, consider the shocking reality that unfolds when the sound of laughter is abruptly silenced by an eviction notice delivered with cruelty and malice. Can you imagine the heartbreak of a family whose only crime was celebrating life and togetherness? How would it feel to have your sanctuary, the very space that nurtures your memories and dreams, suddenly labeled as a threat by someone blinded by prejudice? And more importantly, what does it say about our society when injustice is allowed to flourish in the most unexpected corners of our communities? This is not a tale of abstract injustice, it is a story that could be happening right in your neighborhood. The narrative begins with a family who, for years, opened their home to everyone, regardless of background, race, or creed. Their backyard was a melting pot of cultures and traditions, a place where every month, strangers became friends over shared meals and heartfelt conversations. But then, one fateful day, everything changed. An eviction notice was slapped in their hands, a stark symbol of discrimination that sent shockwaves throughout the community. Have you ever wondered how one moment of intolerance could unravel the fabric of an entire neighborhood? What would compel a person in a position of authority to dismiss decades of community spirit with a single, cold gesture? As you dive deeper into this story, ask yourself, what fuels the fire of prejudice, and how can a community rise from the ashes of such a bitter act? Is it possible for a single act of injustice to ignite a revolution of unity and courage? Imagine a diverse group of neighbors, initially stunned into silence, suddenly finding their voices. Picture an elderly woman, a young lawyer, a community organizer, and countless others coming together to confront discrimination head-on. What kind of power does collective resolve hold, and could it be strong enough to change not just one heart, but an entire community? In the midst of heartbreak and betrayal, an unexpected response emerges. The very people who witnessed the cruelty begin to rally around the family, forming a circle of solidarity that defies the divisive rhetoric of the antagonist. This is where the real story begins, when ordinary citizens, united by a shared sense of justice, decide that enough is enough. They refuse to let hatred win, instead transforming their grief into a determination to fight back. How far would you go to protect your neighbors? What sacrifices would you be willing to make to ensure that every voice is heard and every person is treated with respect? As you listen, imagine the tension in the air as the community plans its next steps. The discussion shifts from shock and sorrow to action and empowerment. Legal strategies are formulated, protest signs are designed, and every neighbor starts to see the glimmer of hope that comes with standing up against systemic injustice. Have you ever witnessed a community transform from passive onlookers into active warriors for justice? What if this could be the turning point that reshapes how we see and treat each other? Now, envision the powerful questions that arise from this unfolding drama. What does it take to stand up in the face of overwhelming adversity? Can one act of kindness or a single step toward unity really change the course of history? And most importantly, are we prepared to look beyond our differences and embrace the strength that lies in our shared humanity? This story isn't just about one family's struggle, it's a mirror reflecting the challenges and triumphs that resonate within us all. Every moment in this narrative is designed to make you pause and reflect. The injustice is palpable, the emotions raw, and the stakes are higher than ever. It begs the question, how would you feel if your life was turned upside down by something as arbitrary as the color of your skin? And when faced with such an act, would you choose to remain silent, or would you join a movement determined to fight back against discrimination? As you prepare to embark on this journey, think about the ripple effects of one courageous act. Imagine the cascading impact on families, neighborhoods, and communities far beyond the immediate circle of those affected. Can you see how one spark can set off a wildfire of hope, illuminating even the darkest corners of our society? What would it mean for your own life if you could be a part of that transformative wave? This is the beginning of a story that challenges everything we thought we knew about community, justice, and the power of unity. It is a call to action that demands you look inward and question the status quo. Are you ready to witness how a single moment of injustice can lead to a revolution of compassion and solidarity? What lessons can we all learn from a family's struggle that transcends personal pain and ignites the spirit of resistance in an entire community? Stay with us as we peel back the layers of this powerful tale, where every word, every gesture, and every tear contributes to a narrative that is as moving as it is inspiring. Prepare to be captivated, to question, and to feel a profound connection to a story that speaks to the heart of what it means to stand together against hate. What would you do if you were in their shoes? How far would you go to protect what is right? Let these questions echo in your mind as you dive into the full story behind this moment of reckoning. The answers might just change the way you see the world, and your place in it. It was a bright, promising Saturday morning when the Robinson family, a proud African-American household celebrated for their warmth and unwavering commitment to community, prepared for one of their much-anticipated monthly barbecues. For years, the Robinsons had transformed their backyard into a haven of friendship, where neighbors from every walk of life gathered to share good food, lively conversation, and genuine smiles. Every month, without fail, the event had grown into a tradition that not only showcased their culinary talents but also built bridges between people of diverse backgrounds. On this particular day, Mr. Robinson was busy igniting the charcoal grill, the flames dancing in tandem with his determined spirit. Meanwhile, Mrs. Robinson carefully arranged vibrant picnic table settings, their colors mirroring the diversity of the gathering that was about to take place. Their children, filled with excitement and a sense of purpose, hung cheerful streamers and balloons across the yard, each decoration adding to the mosaic of hope and community spirit that had become synonymous with the Robinson name. As the first guests began to trickle in, the air was filled with an intoxicating blend of laughter and the irresistible aroma of grilled delicacies. Every neighbor was greeted with open arms and sincere smiles by the Robinsons, who took pride in making sure that everyone, regardless of their background, felt like a cherished part of the family. No one could have predicted that this day, which had begun with such promise, would soon take an unexpected and heartbreaking turn. Just as the barbecue was reaching its lively peak, a figure emerged that would cast an ominous shadow over the festivities. Enter Mr. Pierce, the stern and prejudiced landlord, whose reputation for intolerance had long been whispered about in the quieter corners of the neighborhood. His arrival was marked by a scowl so severe it seemed to suck the brightness right out of the vibrant gathering. As he approached the Robinsons' backyard, every conversation stilled, and curious eyes followed his deliberate, heavy steps. Mr. Robinson, ever the gracious host, stepped forward to greet him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Pierce," he said warmly, extending an invitation that was both genuine and defiant of the tension in the air. "Would you like to join us? There's plenty of food to share." But Mr. Pierce's response was cold and laced with contempt. With a sneer curling at the edges of his mouth, he retorted sharply, "I'm not here for your little gathering." His gaze roamed the diverse group assembled before him, his eyes filled with disdain as he declared, I'm here about the noise and disturbances. This has got to stop." A ripple of confusion passed over the assembled guests as Mr. Robinson tried to understand the source of the complaint. "Disturbances, sir? We're merely hosting a neighborhood barbecue, something we've done every month without incident." His tone was respectful yet laced with disbelief. Mr. Pierce's response was immediate and explosive. "I'm complaining now. This neighborhood used to be quiet and orderly. Now, look at it." His dismissive gesture swept over the colorful decorations and the cheerful faces, each a testament to the unity the Robinsons had so painstakingly fostered. It was clear that beneath his words lay a hateful prejudice that struck at the heart of everything the Robinsons stood for. In an effort to de-escalate the situation, Mrs. Robinson stepped forward, her voice calm yet resolute. "Mr. Pierce, if you have concerns, we're willing to discuss them. I assure you, we're not causing trouble, we're simply building community." But Mr. Pierce scoffed, dismissing her words with a derisive laugh. "Community? Is that what you call this?" he sneered, gesturing disdainfully at the vibrant crowd. "I call it a nuisance, and I will no longer tolerate it." The tension reached a boiling point. Mr. Robinson, his brow furrowed in confusion and hurt, tried once again to find common ground. "If there's something specific we can address, please tell us. We want to be good tenants and better neighbors." Yet Mr. Pierce's face hardened, his voice rising as he berated the assembled crowd. "I've had enough of your excuses. You people are always stirring up problems, always creating noise, and always dragging down the neighborhood." His racist undertones were unmistakable, and a heavy silence fell over the once cheerful gathering. Before anyone could respond, Mr. Pierce's tone shifted. He fixed his unyielding gaze on Mrs. Robinson and declared, "Your language is inappropriate, and you are upsetting our guests. I think it's time you leave." For a fleeting moment, it appeared as if Mr. Pierce might relent. But then, with a cold glint in his eyes, he reached into his jacket and produced a crumpled piece of paper. "I'll leave," he said with a cruel smile, "but not before you accept this." With a dismissive wave, he thrust the paper into Mr. Robinson's hands. As Mr. Robinson unfolded the document, his face fell, and the implications of the words written on it became brutally clear: an eviction notice. What is this?" Mr. Robinson stuttered, his voice breaking as Mrs. Robinson leaned in to read over his shoulder. The paper detailed repeated violations of the noise ordinance and disruption of the peace, and demanded that the Robinson family vacate the premises within 30 days. Shock, disbelief, and sorrow gripped everyone present. In that instant, the joyous celebration had been hijacked by a profound injustice. As Mr. Pierce turned on his heel and strode away, the atmosphere in the backyard shifted from festive to somber. The Robinsons stood frozen, the eviction notice clutched tightly in Mr. Robinson's trembling hands. Mrs. Robinson's eyes welled up with tears as she wrapped an arm around her children, the weight of the moment crushing them all. The neighbors, who had witnessed the entire heart-wrenching exchange, began to close in around the family, forming a protective circle that radiated silent support and simmering anger. Among the first to break the silence was Mrs. Delgado, an elderly neighbor known for her forthright manner. Her voice, though quavering with age, rang out with unyielding clarity: "This isn't right. The Robinsons have always been the best of neighbors. We can't let this injustice stand." Her words shattered the oppressive silence, igniting murmurs of agreement that soon swelled into a chorus of indignation. Mr. Carter, who lived right next door, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. With a steady, reassuring tone, he placed a hand on Mr. Robinson's shoulder and declared, "We're with you. All of us." In that moment, the atmosphere began to shift. The crowd, initially stunned into silence, started to rally together. Clusters of neighbors huddled in small groups, their voices growing more urgent and determined with every passing minute. The once simple neighborhood barbecue was evolving into a rallying cry against discrimination. A young lawyer named Ava Lee, who had only recently moved into the area, stepped forward with fierce determination shining in her eyes. "I specialize in housing discrimination," she announced to the assembled crowd. "If you'll let me help, I want to fight this injustice with you." Hope flickered in Mr. Robinson's eyes as he nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. We truly don't know what to do." Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the community. Soon, more neighbors arrived, some carrying casseroles, others bearing kind words of support and encouragement. The once quiet backyard of the Robinsons, marred by the cruel eviction notice, was now abuzz with collective resolve. In one corner, a small group gathered around Mrs. Delgado's modest picnic table, deep in discussion. Among them was Ethan Martinez, a local community organizer renowned for his ability to mobilize people for a cause. "We need to make some noise about this," he urged, his hands gesturing emphatically. "Mr. Pierce must understand that discrimination will not be tolerated here." His words resonated, and nods of agreement rippled through the group. As the day wore on, ideas began to flow. Plans ranged from organizing a peaceful protest to launching a social media campaign to draw attention to the blatant injustice. The energy in the Robinsons' backyard was palpable, a stark contrast to the despair that had shrouded the community only moments before. With the setting sun casting long, dramatic shadows over the yard, the initial shock and sorrow transformed into a fierce determination and cautious hope. That night, as the Robinson family lay awake, their hearts heavy with the reality of the eviction notice, the neighborhood was wide awake, minds buzzing with plans for justice. Little did Mr. Pierce know that his prejudiced actions had awakened a dormant giant, a united community ready to stand together against injustice. The following morning, with the sun rising over a neighborhood now brimming with determination, Ava Lee wasted no time. She had set up a makeshift office in her living room, transforming her dining table into a command center strewn with legal documents, sticky notes, and evidence. "We need to gather every bit of proof of discrimination," she explained to a group of determined neighbors who had gathered to assist. "Every small detail counts." Her urgency and precision galvanized the community further. Simultaneously, Ethan Martinez turned his focus to organizing efforts online. He created a social media group specifically dedicated to coordinating the community's response, sharing updates, and rallying support from beyond the neighborhood's borders. Within hours, hundreds joined the cause, each contributing in their own way. Ethan's impassioned message read, "We're not just fighting for the Robinsons, we're fighting for the soul of our community." The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Despite her age, Mrs. Delgado took it upon herself to knock on doors throughout the neighborhood, collecting signatures for a petition demanding that Mr. Pierce retract the eviction notice. Meanwhile, Mr. Carter used his connections in local media to ensure that the story wouldn't fade into obscurity. Every neighbor who had once exchanged only a polite nod now had a voice, a powerful, resonant cry for justice. In the midst of all this, the Robinsons were buoyed by the flood of support. They received visits from neighbors bearing casseroles, warm words of encouragement, and heartfelt reassurances. For a brief moment, the pain of discrimination was softened by the unity and resilience that filled every corner of their home. Yet, the community knew that this was only the beginning of a long, arduous fight against systemic injustice. Later that day, Ethan Martinez organized a community meeting at the local park. The turnout was nothing short of staggering. People from all walks of life gathered on the grassy field, united by a shared goal, to stand up against discrimination and restore dignity to their neighborhood. Ava Lee took center stage, her voice steady and clear as she outlined the legal battle ahead. "It won't be easy," she cautioned, "but our case is strong. Mr. Pierce's actions are a blatant violation of fair housing laws." Every word she spoke was met with rapt attention, the faces in the crowd illuminated by the fading light of the setting sun. As Ava finished her remarks, the silence that followed was charged with anticipation. Gradually, ideas began to circulate among the gathered citizens. A local business owner offered to provide banners for an upcoming protest. A group of dedicated teachers volunteered to spearhead a letter-writing campaign to city officials. Even a retired police officer, with years of experience and a deep sense of duty, suggested that everyone document any further interactions with Mr. Pierce. The meeting concluded on a note of fervent determination. Ethan Martinez, now more resolute than ever, stood on a makeshift stage and called the community's attention. "Tomorrow," he announced, "we take this fight public. We will hold a peaceful protest outside Mr. Pierce's office to show him, and the entire world, that our community stands united against hate." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. People began coordinating carpools, designing protest signs, and planning chants. The park buzzed with energy, a stark and inspiring transformation from the despair that had gripped the neighborhood just a day earlier. That very night, a local news van pulled up to the Robinsons' home. A determined young reporter approached Mr. Robinson and asked, "We've heard what's happening here. Would you share your story?" Mr. Robinson hesitated for a moment, glancing at Mrs. Robinson for reassurance. With renewed determination, he nodded and spoke from the heart. He recounted the painful events of the day, describing the sting of discrimination, the fear of losing their home, and the incredible support that had flooded in from neighbors. His words, raw and genuine, carried far beyond his doorstep, resonating in living rooms across the city. The reporter's solemn expression shifted as she turned to the camera. "This isn't just one family's story," she declared. "It's a call to action for our entire community." As the broadcast ended, phones lit up with messages of support and outrage. The Robinsons' plight had sparked a conversation that extended well beyond their immediate neighborhood, a conversation about fairness, unity, and the fight against discrimination. In an inspiring twist, the very next day the community decided to reclaim the narrative using the most unexpected of tools, a massive neighborhood barbecue right on the street in front of the Robinsons' home. Ethan Martinez, ever the master organizer, quickly set up an online sign-up sheet for food and supplies. Within hours, it was filled to capacity. Mrs. Delgado volunteered her famous empanadas, and Mr. Carter promised to bring his award-winning chili. Even those who had never spoken to the Robinsons before now eagerly contributed, determined to be part of a movement that transcended mere words. As dawn broke on the day of the street barbecue, the neighborhood transformed into a hive of activity. Volunteers arrived early, setting up tables and chairs borrowed from local churches and community centers. The tantalizing aroma of grilled meats and vegetables filled the air, a sensory reminder of what true community spirit could achieve. Amidst the bustle, the Robinsons emerged from their home, their eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. Mrs. Robinson clutched her hands to her mouth as emotions overwhelmed her, while Mr. Robinson stood tall, his arm around her, his eyes reflecting both pain and hope. Taking a break from her legal preparations, Ava Lee approached the couple with a determined look. "This is just the beginning," she declared, gesturing to the crowd that had gathered in celebration. "We're not here only for the food, we're here to show Mr. Pierce and anyone else who might be watching that hate has no place in our community." Her words rang out like a rallying cry, igniting even more energy among the diverse group assembled on the street. As the morning progressed, the atmosphere grew festive. Children played and laughed freely while adults engaged in animated conversations. The local news crew returned to capture the unfolding scene, and the reporter who had interviewed Mr. Robinson the night before smiled as she took in the vibrant display of unity. "This," she murmured to her cameraman, "is what community looks like." Her voice carried the unspoken promise that change was indeed possible. Just past noon, a hush fell over the gathering as Mr. Pierce arrived in his car, inching slowly down the crowded street. Emerging with his usual air of self-assuredness, he paused as his eyes fell upon the sea of faces that now filled the street. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, to the surprise of everyone present, Mrs. Delgado stepped forward carrying a plate of her signature empanadas. With measured firmness, she addressed Mr. Pierce, "Why don't you join us? There's plenty of food here, and I think you'll find we're not the kind of neighbors you assumed we were." The tension was palpable as Mr. Pierce hesitated. His eyes darted from Mrs. Delgado to the expectant crowd behind her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he extended his hand, took the plate, and followed her toward the center of the gathering. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd. This unexpected gesture was not the confrontation many had braced for. Instead, it was a quiet, powerful moment of potential reconciliation. As the afternoon wore on, the barbecue took on an almost celebratory air. Music filled the street from portable speakers, and impromptu dance circles formed among neighbors who were determined to reclaim their sense of community. The Robinsons moved through the crowd, pausing frequently to thank each person for their support, their smiles genuine even in the face of uncertainty about the future. Mr. Pierce, meanwhile, remained at the periphery, a silent witness to the transformation his actions had inadvertently sparked. His presence, though still a reminder of past prejudice, now also carried the faint glimmer of hope that minds could change. When the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the street, Ethan Martinez called for everyone's attention. Standing on a makeshift stage with a microphone in hand and flanked by the Robinsons, he addressed the gathering with a voice full of conviction. "Today, we have shown what our community is truly made of," he declared. "We have come together in the face of injustice with open hearts and the shared joy of good food." A cheer erupted from the crowd, but Ethan quickly raised his hand for silence before continuing, "This barbecue isn't just a celebration, it's a statement. It's a promise that we will stand together against hate and discrimination in any form it takes." All eyes turned to Mr. Pierce, who now stood at the edge of the gathering, his usual confidence noticeably shaken. The plate of empanadas from Mrs. Delgado remained untouched on his side, a silent testament to the weight of the moment. He looked around, absorbing the sight of a community united by compassion and resolve. At that moment, Ava Lee stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "Mr. Pierce, it's time we address the legal implications of your eviction notice. This isn't just about one family, it's about the rights of every person in this neighborhood. Your actions have not only targeted the Robinsons but have sown discord in a community that values respect and dignity for all." The atmosphere grew charged with anticipation as Mr. Pierce's eyes darted between Ava and the expectant crowd. The gravity of his actions seemed to settle upon him, and after a long, agonizing pause, he finally spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, "I've made a mistake." His admission, though quiet, carried a weight that was felt by everyone present. His posture shifted subtly as he continued, his voice gaining strength, "I hereby retract the eviction notice. The Robinsons may remain in their home for as long as they wish." He turned his gaze directly toward the family and added, "Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, I owe you a public apology. My actions were inexcusable, and I am deeply sorry for the pain and distress I have caused." A heavy silence descended upon the crowd as Mr. Robinson stepped forward, his eyes locking with Mr. Pierce's. With a solemn yet determined tone, he declared, "We do not accept your apology, Mr. Pierce. More importantly, we hope that this experience opens your eyes. Every person, regardless of race or background, deserves to be treated with respect and dignity." Mrs. Robinson nodded in agreement, her voice steady as she added, "This isn't just about us. It's about building a community where everyone feels welcome and valued. We hope you will join us in this effort moving forward." The tension that had filled the air began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. Sensing the significance of the moment, Ethan Martinez stepped forward once again and addressed the crowd. "Let this be a turning point for our neighborhood," he proclaimed. "Today, we have proven that when we stand together against injustice, real change is not only possible, it is inevitable." His words were met with a thunderous cheer, a unified affirmation of the community's resolve. In the days that followed, the neighborhood transformed. The Robinsons' struggle had ignited a movement that brought people together in ways no one could have imagined. Neighbors who had once merely exchanged polite nods were now collaborating on initiatives, sharing resources, and standing shoulder to shoulder against discrimination. The memory of that painful day had become a catalyst for a renewed commitment to fairness and unity. Months later, the Robinsons hosted another barbecue. This time, the street overflowed with an even larger crowd, old friends and new faces alike, all united by a shared vision of a just and inclusive community. Mr. Pierce, whose role in the earlier events had once been defined by prejudice, was seen engaging in friendly conversation with Mrs. Delgado about her famous empanada recipe. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mr. Robinson raised his glass and spoke with quiet pride, "We have shown that when we stand together, we can overcome any obstacle." If you've been inspired by the strength and unity of this community, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on how we can all work together to combat injustice. Your voice matters. Let's keep this conversation going and build a future where everyone is valued and respected. In this journey from heartbreak to hope, the Robinson family's ordeal transformed an entire neighborhood. It wasn't just about an eviction notice or a moment of discrimination, it was about the power of unity, the strength in diversity, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Every neighbor's contribution, whether it was a signature on a petition, a comforting word, or a volunteer effort at a community meeting, played a crucial role in turning a dark day into a beacon of hope. From that fateful day when Mr. Pierce's unjust act threatened to tear apart the fabric of the neighborhood, a powerful movement was born. The Robinsons' backyard, once a simple space for family gatherings, became the epicenter of a community-wide awakening. Every smile shared, every tear shed, and every act of solidarity resonated deeply, forging a bond that could not be broken by hate or prejudice. Ava Lee's swift legal action and meticulous attention to every detail ensured that every instance of discrimination was documented and turned into evidence against systemic injustice. Meanwhile, Ethan Martinez's organizational prowess rallied hundreds of voices, transforming individual anger into a collective roar for change. Even the quiet strength of Mrs. Delgado, as she went door to door gathering signatures, symbolized the resilience of a community that refused to be silenced. The neighborhood's transformation was evident not only in the grand gestures of protest and community meetings but also in the everyday interactions that followed. Strangers who had once kept to themselves now engaged in meaningful conversations, forging friendships that spanned generations and cultural divides. The Robinsons' struggle had become a mirror reflecting the best of humanity, where compassion triumphed over prejudice, and unity paved the way for real, lasting change. And so, as night fell over the neighborhood and the stars emerged one by one, there was an unmistakable sense that a new chapter had begun. The story of the Robinsons was more than a tale of personal loss, it was a rallying cry, a testament to the idea that when a community stands together, no force of discrimination can keep it down. Their resilience had sparked a movement, one that would continue to inspire, mobilize, and drive forward a commitment to justice for all. This is a story for anyone who believes in the power of community, for anyone who knows that true strength lies in our differences, and for everyone who understands that even in the darkest of times, hope can be found when we come together. Let this be a reminder that every act of solidarity, no matter how small, contributes to a future where justice, dignity, and respect are not just ideals but the foundation of our shared reality. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe and share your thoughts below. Your feedback is the spark that keeps our community vibrant and united. Together, we can and will build a better tomorrow.